Please welcome founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies, Michael R. Bloomberg.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Nice crowd. Thank you all for coming. And welcome to the Bloomberg Global Business Forum. And to our international guests, welcome to New York City. More than 200 languages are spoken here. And as mayor, I was completely fluent in each one of them. I'd prove it to you now, but I just don't want to show off. So we'll go on to the next thing. Seriously, we have an outstanding group of leaders here with us, and let me begin by thanking our partners in this year's forum, Ajay, Banga, the president of the World Bank, and Kristalina Georgieva, the managing director of the International Monetary Fund. And let me thank all of you for making the time to join us during this very busy week in New York City. We launched the Global Business Forum back in 2017 to coincide with the UN General Assembly. It serves as a complement to the political negotiations that happen at the United Nations, because the fact is that none of the big challenges that we face can be solved by governments alone. All of them require cooperation, not only across borders, but also between governments and businesses. And the more the two groups work together, the better positioned we'll be to seize opportunities to save lives and to improve people's lives. So we created this forum to give influential leaders a chance to have conversations that might not have happened otherwise, and hopefully to build new partnerships on issues that we think would benefit from greater cooperation. Now, there's no shortage of these issues. We saw in that video that just was played. The effect of the pandemic continues to reverberate across the global economy, from stubborn inflation and high costs of living to empty buildings in the city's business districts. And at the same time, we're witnessing the growth of two powerful forces, each with enormous potential to transform people's lives: artificial intelligence and climate change. Today, the climate change is the special focus of our conversations because no single issue presents bigger threats to peace and prosperity or greater opportunities to spur economic growth if we act wisely and quickly. Every day brings alarming new evidence of the dangers we face if we don't. Last year was the hottest on record. This year it's on track to shatter that record. Here in the United States, you should know the state of Arizona recently had 100 straight days of 100-degree temperatures, and that's the first time that has ever happened. Rising global heat has come with rising costs in economic damage, and tragically in lives. And this year's deadly heat waves struck Mexico, the Mediterranean, and Morocco, just to name a few places that suffered under extreme heat. Meanwhile, deadly floods have caused devastation in West Africa, southern Brazil, and so many other places around the world. Now, along with those tragedies, we've seen some important progress, in all fairness. Investment in clean energy continues to rise to new record highs, but we're not moving fast enough to prevent the worst effects of climate change from happening. And all of us today here can help change that. One way we can do that is by highlighting great ideas and then making sure that they find support and investment to scale up. And that's the inspiration behind an event we're hosting here this morning called the Earthshot Prize Innovation Summit. The prize was launched by Prince William, and Bloomberg Philanthropies has been glad to be a partner and a financial supporter since the beginning. Today, we've brought together some of the entrepreneurs, inventors, and activists who have won the prize or who have been finalists. It is an inspiring group that captures the spirit of creativity, optimism, and common purpose that we need to confront climate change and all the big issues we'll hear about today. But while we look for promising new solutions, we also urgently need to speed up investment in the clean energy solutions we already have. And that's especially true in the developing countries that have contributed the least to climate change, but now face some of its biggest risks. Bloomberg and Bloomberg Philanthropies are committed to doing our part by both providing more of the data and transparency investors need and by building more public-private partnerships. This morning, you should know, alongside the Earthshot Summit, we hosted the first ever Global Renewables Summit. It brought together heads of state with private sector and nonprofit leaders to knock down barriers to investment in clean energy. We're also leading the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, or GFANZ for short, which is helping financial firms figure out how to cut emissions in their portfolios in ways that will also drive economic growth. At last year's COP28 in Dubai, we joined partners to announce the world's largest effort to help banks in developing countries create these net zero plans. It is called the Global Capacity Building Coalition. And today we launched a digital platform that provides data and technical assistance that is needed to find more opportunities in clean air. We also announced a major expansion of our net zero data public utility. It brings together data on corporate emissions in one place and makes that data accessible to everyone free of charge. That empowers people to hold companies accountable for making progress and reward those that lead the way. Now, there's much more to do, and today's a chance to make headway. We have a lot of great speakers ahead, including President Biden. But first, we'll hear from our partners in the Global Business Forum, Ajay and Kristalina. As heads of the world's two most important and influential multinational banks, their leadership really is critical, and they both have shown a lot of creativity in adapting their organizations to meet the challenges of today, especially climate change. They've also both shown a strong commitment to working closely with business leaders in this forum, and this forum is a great example of their partnership. We've honored to have them both here with us today. They'll be led in conversation by Mark Carney, who has long been one of the world's leaders when it comes to climate finance. Mark and I have worked closely together for a number of years, including as co-chairs of GFANZ. And I asked him to serve on the board of Bloomberg Philanthropies and to chair our company's board of directors. So we're also looking forward to the panel ahead. But before they come up, let me thank all of you again for being here and all you do to keep us moving forward, and all the best for a productive forum. This is a problem that has enormous implications if we don't do anything. But the good news is, if we pull together and if we work very hard, we can make a big difference. We have in some places, but still the 100 days in over 100 just tells you what's really going on in this world. Turn on the television, you'll see the floods and you'll see the forest fires. You'll see the people falling over when they don't have enough water. There really is something changing here, and the calamity decliners, whatever the word is, I don't know what they're thinking about when they say climate change isn't real. It couldn't be more real, and thank God we in this room are probably all okay, but there are an awful lot of people around the world who are not. So thank you for everything you're doing, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Please welcome President of the World Bank Group, Ajay Banga, Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, Kristalina Georgieva, in conversation with UN Special Envoy on Climate Action and Finance, Chair at Bloomberg and Co-Chair at GFANZ, Mark Carney.
Great. Thank you. All right. Fantastic. Well, as Mike just said, Mike Bloomberg just said, the two most important international financial institutions and partners in this event, which I think is illustrative of the way you two and senior management in the organizations have moved to be focused on impact and working with all stakeholders. And so we've got 15 minutes, and I thought what we would do is dive right into that. And I might start with the new kid on the block, if you will, Ajay, as it's pretty much a year.
It's called hazing.
Yeah, it's a year since your appointment. You hit the ground running, and I guess an open-ended question. What changes are underway that you think will have some of the biggest impacts going forward with respect to the World Bank Group?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me, and it's good to be here with her. I call her my sister from another mother, and I will tell you that's the biggest change. The fact that these two institutions can actually work in a way that they were designed to work 80 years ago. No, I don't mean that you shouldn't change for what's changed in the environment. The idea of creating a macro-focused institution with a development-focused institution and find a way for them to make 2 + 2 = 5 is pretty important. And while that doesn't show up every day to everybody in a system, for those who work with us, it does. And I think that's one big piece. The second big piece is to expand, Mark, and I'm giving you the plumbing of the institution right now, as compared to the big picture, is to expand the vision of the institution, the aperture from which we look at problems, from being only about poverty to also including the challenge, the intertwined challenges, what we call livable planet, climate, fragility, conflict, violence, pandemics, food insecurity, and thinking that you can segregate these into little buckets is a luxury we don't have. And that leads to the need for us to work quicker, turn projects around faster. We've turned down the time from getting from a project being discussed to approved from 19 months to 16, headed to 12, to simplicity inside the organization and breaking some of the silos down for our clients, to how we work with other MDBs, back to the point about working with her. All that, combined with leveraging our balance sheet and in a different way, is what we're up to. It leads to some things. A couple of them is last year at COP28, you and I were there together, and we announced that we put 45% of our money into climate finance by 2025. We're actually going to reach very close to that number this year itself, up from 30-something% just a year and a half ago. So you can take this plumbing and then you can put big things onto it and have the ambition to drive, but you can't do that if the basics of the bank aren't working the way a better bank should work.
Okay, so speed, scale, and sisterhood.
And simplicity.
And simplicity and sisterhood.
Gotta get stuff.
Which is collaboration. So, Kristalina, you're just starting your second term.
Yeah.
And
she's starting her second term.
She is.
Yes.
Yeah. No, you. No. I've moved on. I moved on to the IMF.
You will.
Yeah.
Just let's be clear.
Second term.
We're talking to her now. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. If you haven't made poverty history on a livable planet by the end of your first term, you have to do the second term. Yep. So it works. But second term. And I mean, many amazing things in the first term, but one of the things that really struck me is you, and with partners obviously, but you turned dead money, SDRs, into action with the Resilience and Sustainability Trust at a time when it was absolutely essential. And I wonder if you could draw that out a bit more in terms of the overall impact of some of the things the IMF is doing, including in collaboration with the World Bank.
Let me say that what we are experiencing today is really remarkable. We have lived through unprecedented shocks: pandemic, war in Europe, crisis of energy and food prices, inflation, interest rates, and yet you look at the world economy, this year it would go 3.2%. Next year we expect 3.2%. It did not collapse. And the question is, why? What made it so resilient? And it is putting in place sound foundation of good policies and strong institutions. And we at the IMF have been a big part of it, writing this story of resilience. Yep. Now, you look into the future, and you see that there will be more exogenous shocks, climate change being one of the causes of these shocks. So inevitably at the fund, we are asking a question: what can we do? We integrate climate vulnerability in our analysis. We look at green growth opportunities for our members. We are a financial institution. People look at us and say, you think climate is important? Put money where your mouth is. And this is how we created the Resilience and Sustainability Trust. It is a fabulous story of creativity. During this period of shocks, we have injected $1 trillion in liquidity and reserves to help the economy overcome these shocks. $650 billion from special drawing rights. They do not add to debt. This is our collective power in action. We gave it to everybody, but some of our members are very strong. They don't need that injection of reserves. And as you said, for them, this is a sleeping beauty. We walk it up. So we got about 100 billion back that we can lend at concessional terms and do so in partnership with the World Bank very closely. So here is what we do. We, from the IMF, we create fiscal space for our vulnerable members. We don't tell them how to use the money. We say, here it is. You can address this danger of climate change. And then comes the World Bank with a powerful program of investments. So this fiscal space that we create together with the World Bank becomes a transformational force. This is how we do it.
That's how we do it, baby. There we go. That's right. There you go.
Hey,
so
she left out the last word, baby.
Baby. I know. That's how we do it, baby. I thought everyone was going to, that was where the crowd was supposed to come in. So, and that's the handoff. So she and the IMF hand off this baby in macro-micro coordination to the World Bank. And what do you do with that fiscal capacity if countries choose to pursue it? And maybe talk a bit about Mission 300.
So, Mark, one example of that. In fact, the first example, we're working on this together, is the idea of getting electricity to Africans in the world. If you think about the African continent, 600 million people in Africa do not have any electricity. So when you fly over the continent at night and you see dark areas everywhere, it's not because there aren't people, it's because they're living the way their forefathers did. And I think in the 21st century, that's a relatively shameful situation to be in, and one that, if you think of electricity as a basic human right, health, education, you know, your elevator works, things work, refrigerators, medicines being kept cold, safety with street lights. Everything we take for granted depends upon electricity. And they don't have it at all. I'm not talking about intermittent and brownouts. I'm talking about zero. So what we've committed to do with the African Development Bank and a couple of other partners is to reach 300 million out of the 600 billion with renewable energy by 2030. It will take a lot of work for governments.
Can we just stop and reflect on that for a second, and then you go. 300 million people with electricity by 2030. Right. I mean, it's a remarkable.
I mean, the bank did 117 million people connected to electricity in the prior decade. Yeah. This is that multiplied by 3 in 6 years. It's going to need work. It's going to need about 20 billion from our International Development Association, the part of the bank that gives money at concessional and grant terms to the poorest countries in the world, which, by the way, is coming up for a replenishment in December, which is important. So if any of you have influence with the Western countries and the OECD, remind them that this is a good time to put money into the bank. Yep. Every dollar gets to $4, which, by the way, is the only government program that multiplies rather than divides. So this is a good move. And
with the exception of the programs the president is going to speak about.
Yes, no doubt. Well, to be clear, I told him the same story. I told him the same story, and he wasn't amused, but that's a different topic. So, but it's the truth, and the truth shall set you free. So the fact is that you take that, it's going to need money from the private sector, but then it needs money for the governments to reform their utilities, to connect them to the grid, to install the right basic technologies to enable this to happen, where they're going to get that money from when they're putting more money to debt repayment than they are to health and education put together. That's when she steps in. So we can go to the government of a country, talk about doing this with them in an energy compact, go to Kristalina and say, you need to talk to these guys. If she has a program with them, she can go to them and say, I know you're working really hard on connecting people to renewable energy. Go ahead and do that work. I know you need fiscal headroom. Here's money for that. That's the way we are working this together. The second thing we're trying to do this now for is for healthcare. And that's new.
Yes.
Her board has just kind of got engaged with the topic well. I think between our two institutions and others, if we were to use these RSTs, so-called dead money, to be used for purposes of this type, so-called global public goods, then I think we're doing a smart thing together.
It's Lazarus money. You're turning it from dead to, I mean, it's a remarkable potential impact. It's, from my perspective, it is hard to overstate the potential here and what you've created, not out of nothing, but out of the resources that had just lay fallow. Now, Kristalina, you've seen a lot. You were senior in the World Bank, obviously senior in the European Union before. You've seen shocks, you've seen crises, you've seen difficult times, and you are always positive, optimistic, moving forward. I've known you for a long time. So I wonder if you could just draw for us, I mean, we've just had a big element of hope there, but what gives you hope? What drives your optimism today beyond what we've addressed?
Aside from me?
Kristalina, for the moment. And
it is my brother that gives me the hope. But, I mean, I want to remind us all that we have gone through very difficult times before.
yeah.
In the midst of the Depression, before the war, John Maynard Keynes wrote an essay, Economic Possibilities for our grandchildren. And in this essay, he predicted that 100 years later, we will be about 8 times better off. Fast forward to today, we are actually more than 8 times better off. Why? What is it that delivers this progress? Our incredible ability to create new things, our creativity as humanity. And we see technological advancements today solving problems that were unthinkable to be solved before. Who would have thought that we can have renewable energy so cheaply available to us as we do today? And the second thing that gives me optimism is that majority of people are genuinely kind and good and helpful to each other. I know that sometimes we forget about it when we see all the anger, very often justifiable anger coming through. But that kindness, that willingness for us to help a neighbor, this is what shines when you are in a flood-affected area, in a hurricane-hit place. And I think that these two things, the power of creativity and the goodness of humanity, I believe that my grandchildren, 100 years from now, they would have better opportunities that we have today. Yes, history is a zigzag. It goes up and then it comes down, but the trajectory is upward. And I want to ask people in this audience, do you believe in the power of humanity to overcome whatever is thrown at us? Do you?
Yes, there we go. So we're going to try that one more time at the end. I'm going to finish with Alexander Stubb, who is the president of Finland, told me a couple months ago that we as humans, we always over-rationalize the past. So when you think about how we got out of the financial crisis, the euro crisis, COVID, et cetera, it becomes very obvious in retrospect. Now, it wasn't so obvious at the time, and we had to scramble. We over-dramatize the present. Things look much more difficult and dire than present. But we also do, with the exception of this crowd, these two, and what they represent, is we underestimate the future. We underestimate our capacity to solve these problems. And it's through collaboration of the World Bank, the IMF, and actually through the collaboration represented by all of you at the Global Business Forum. Thank you, and let's hear a big yes for the
Please welcome CEO of CDP, Sherry Madera, Chair of the Board of International Organization of Securities Commissions, Jean-Paul Servais, in conversation with CEO of LSEG, David Schwimmer.
Good afternoon. So we have an opportunity to talk about the power of data to enable action on climate change, and in particular, the net zero data public utility. And 2 years ago, we started discussing the idea of an open repository for companies' core climate data. And this is a key part of the solution to accelerate the net zero transition, especially as climate reporting is becoming a widespread regulatory requirement. Last year during COP28, we made progress towards making this a reality. We launched the Net Zero Data Public Utility as a proof of concept. And that proof of concept provided an initial sample of companies' emissions data and reduction targets, structured in a decision-useful way. Now we're moving into the next chapter of the NZDPU, as we call it, and we're working in the background on some governance changes. But today, we are announcing a big change, a big milestone for the NZDPU. NZDPU is going to be expanding from its initial core set from the proof of concept of about 400 companies' climate data to more than 10,000 companies, and this is in partnership with CDP. And will be representing over 50% of global market cap. So a dramatic change that we have just announced today. And that is a terrific next step. So I'm very happy to be here today with Sherry Madera of CDP and Jean-Paul Servais of IOSCO to talk about this. So Sherry, we'll start with you. If you could just tell us a bit more about the announcement and the data that CDP is providing.
Great. Well, thank you, David. And it is an exciting day because being the foundational data partners for the NZDPU is an enormous point of pride for CDP because it is a drive towards efficiency. It is an example of being able to use the data again and again. So this use case, this public good use case, is something that CDP is incredibly proud of, because we're already collecting the world's data. We are the largest climate data repository in the world at the moment, and we need to be able to make sure that that's used. Because what we're also experiencing is an incredible burden to companies in order to produce this data and to report it. So the only way that we are going to make progress and make sure that we have more data to use is to make sure that that data is in a write once, use it many times format. And CDP's 24 years helps to drive capacity building, allows depth and breadth and granularity of that data. And so today, working with NZDPU, we're able to put that data in the hands of consumers, in the hands of governments, in the hands of those that are starting to think about what does this really mean. And of course, we're going to continue to service investors, to service those that are using it for purchasing decisions, and for those that are using it for compliance. But this is special, so thanks.
And Jean-Paul, we ultimately want to see climate data approaching equivalence with financial data in terms of its consistency, its availability, its reliability. What steps has IOSCO taken to take us down this path?
Well, first of all, allow me to thank you and Bloomberg Philanthropies and the Business Global Fund for having me on board. It's a real pleasure for me as a financial supervisor and for me to have a conference dedicated about the power of data. That's fascinating for me, and I'm so happy to be here. Because when I was elected by IOSCO board less than 2 years ago, my first comment and proposal to say, I think it's rather realistic to think that we will endorse ISSB standard in less than 1 year. I'm not sure that everybody in the audience was convinced. 1 year after, I had the pleasure in Bangkok to announce the endorsement. And then I had one statistic, my Belgium statistic, I'm native from Belgium, to say, I think that we can expect that at the end of the day, 130,000 companies will use ISSB standards, interoperability with European standards and other standards. Not sure that many people in the room were also convinced by the solid scientific approach of my statistic. But then when I see, ladies and gentlemen, no. Today, I had the pleasure to be involved in a lot of panels. And what was the statistic? 130,000. Does it mean that I'm speaking about fake news? No. Because I had the pleasure to see that recently during our annual meeting this year in Athens, so you see Marrakesh, Asia, Bangkok and Athens, I had the pleasure to announce with Emmanuel Faber, the chair of ISSB, that we have been approached by 20 jurisdictions, ladies and gentlemen, EU for one jurisdiction, explaining us that the call for action coming for the IOSCO was very powerful. 20 jurisdictions having decided to switch, I would say, to the ISSB framework. 20 jurisdictions, ladies and gentlemen, it means 50% of the global GDP all around the world. It means 30% of the global market capitalization. Who had expected? So it means that we now have the capacity, I would say, to speak the same language. Of course, with some carve-in, carve-outs of different accents. The danger would be to think that we can be perfect in one day. We are missing some data, but now with this capacity to use 130,000, it means a fantastic advantage for initiative like NZDPO. It means the capacity also to have more granular data, more quality, quantity for scope 3, for having sound and solid transition plans. So you see, it's a step-by-step approach. But for this, I think that I am accountable to you, ladies and gentlemen. It means that every year, every 6 months, I have to come back like this. In New York, I would say, to explain what we are doing and to say, well, we are able to deliver on time. And that's important for the trust from our city. If not, we will have greenwashing.
So, Jean-Paul, building on the progress you've just talked about, Sherry, let me come back to you. How is this partnership actually going to work between CDP and NZDPU in terms of how will it help companies actually disclose their data?
Well, I think that we're not trying to remake the wheel, David, and that is a really good thing. The world needs to channel its resources. 24 years ago, CDP started. We had an idea. Climate data should really be something that investors start using in order to be able to allocate capital. Now we all kind of snicker, all of us in this room think that that's something quite mainstream. Not all places in the world think it's as mainstream. So our work is not done. So we do need to continue to be able to build that transparency is good, being able to utilize data and bring it to the surface is good. And the only way we're actually going to fulfill that is to make it an economic argument so that CFOs around the world will say, I want to invest in making sure we surface this information because it's good for access to capital. It's good for being able to tell my customers when they ask me. It's great to tell my talent. And I have to comply because I'm actually putting this in various jurisdictions. CDP has also been aligned with ISSB, so we're very much on the same side here, which is that alignment with ISSB is happening today. So using CDP and disclosing through that, you are aligned with ISSB S2. That is a really proud thing for us to say because it sweats that data, it uses that data, and that's how we're going to push it into NZDPU as that use case. So as we continue to generate this, we're also convincing those that are making sure that this is value for money. Because every dollar you spend on reporting is a dollar you can't spend on action. And that's just not okay. So if CDP continues to do the job, we don't remake the wheel and squander resources and time that the world doesn't have, we are delighted to continue to use that data to give more insight to more people.
And Jean-Paul, from a regulatory perspective, whom do you expect to use this data and how?
My answer will be a little bit amazing for you. I would say, I hope John and Mary in the street. I hope the retail investor, because what we are doing, it's a very fascinating journey. First of all, a positive one, especially for people like me. When we have to launch a reform, it's because something went wrong from a financial point of view, lessons to be learned. If we have a forward-looking, a common approach, I would say a positive approach. And the expectations are not only coming from President Biden, from the G20 leaders, from the FSB, and so on, of course, for the World Bank, IMF, but also for the people who are in the street with us, our kids. And they would like to understand in which investment they could invest, which could be in line with the existing expectation. They are not interested, you kids, my kids, our citizens, our neighbors are not interested at all in having to work with a soup of an alphabet, soup of different standards. They think global because we are speaking about cross-border objectives and challenges. That's the reason why I hope that at the end of the day, they will be able to understand that this database, this information, this data, more and more granular, are free of access. But of course, I would say in the first line, it's about investor. And that's the advantage of working with a framework like ISSB standard as endorsed by IOSCO. The focus is about materiality to be useful for investor, to make decisions well-informed and to see what's the best capital allocation. That's it, I would say. It's a proportionate, step-by-step approach. And of course, I would say other clients will be financial institutions, insurance, let us be clear, and for this, we need more and more data, clean data, challenge data, also by external auditors, because it's about trust. And that's what we're doing together. We will now have, before the end of this year, a fully fledged comprehensive toolkit at global level.
And I'll ask each of you quickly, where do we go from here in terms of really making data accessible on a global scale to address this challenge? And then what challenges do you see in doing that? Maybe start with Sherry.
Let's start with the challenges so we can end with a high note. The challenges are in convincing the companies out there that there is value for money here. CDP embraces the fact that there's increasing mandatory disclosures. And we need to also make sure that it is not disclosure for disclosure's sake. Mandatory disclosures say you have to surface the information, not that you have to use it. And so we need to all think about how it is that that data is part of decision-useful forward thinking. And I think that that is critical. And just a little hope, which is that actually from the first year that a company discloses, within 2 years, they lower their emissions 7 to 10%. That's a fact. And actually, if we continue to move forward with that and continue to accelerate transparency, hopefully we're going to see that number rise as well.
Jean-Paul?
Well, I think, I am definitely convinced that digital tagging will be instrumental. Let us be clear. If not, we will have a lot of very useful information, but many people, many professionals, other business leaders won't be able to understand where they can find, even with very powerful artificial intelligence tools. That's the reason why digital tagging, it means interoperability. And for me, having had the pleasure, Brussels-based supervisor, to see that 2 weeks after the announcement of ISSB, there was an agreement between the Open Commission and ISSB about interoperability. My mother was used to say, I would say, nothing happens by chance. There are no coincidences. When you see that we have now a full interoperability, that I see every month new jurisdictions switching, to ISSB stand, and maybe, I would say also maybe more surprising, because I didn't expect for a full endorsement, not with carve-in, carve-out, which was maybe more expected. So I see that, of course, we have to take into account national specificities. The world is a village, but there is no one-size-fits-all approach about everything. I have a very, very large growing emerging market. The majority of my colleagues are representative of growing emerging market in IOSCO, with members coming from 130 jurisdictions involved in the supervision of 95% of, I would say, the financial market. So it means that global agenda doesn't mean that we are not able to take into national speed, but it means at the same time interoperability. Of course, I would say the speed of the train won't be the same in any jurisdiction. The most important for me is that we start on time. It was 1 year ago, and now we are discussing about data, about capacity building. So that's good news. We are no more, again, discussing about framework. It exists. We are now switching, and people from the industry, you, preparers, users, are just asking questions. They are not pushing back. They are just saying, okay, what do I have to do? Could you explain? And that's the reason why we have to be helpful for that.
So plenty more to do, but huge progress made over the last year or two in terms of really making climate data as actionable as financial data. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please welcome Coordinating Minister of Maritime Affairs and Investment of Indonesia, His Excellency Luhut Binsar Pandjaitan, CEO of ALTÉRRA, Majid Al-Suwaidi, Managing Director and CEO of Macquarie Group, Shemara Wikramanayake, Group Chief Executive of Standard Chartered, Bill Winters, in conversation with Bloomberg Television Chief Africa Correspondent and Anchor Jennifer Zabasajja.
Hi, everyone. So earlier we were hearing from the World Bank and the IMF, Ajay, Banga, and of course Kristalina, about the progress that we've seen with climate finance. And I think when we think about the mobilizing of private capital and capital, public and private capital, the Just Energy Transition Partnership is a good example of that. And we have Minister Luhut here from Indonesia to talk us through that. Indonesia is one of the first countries that are a part of this Just Energy Transition Partnership Agreement. Minister, how has this collaboration worked between the public sector and the private sector?
I think it is very important. We set up the task force to prepare and to study this well. And we need very much, of course, the public sector to support this one. I don't think the government can do it alone. But we are quite successful, I should say, to set up this plan. So soon we're going to announce to have 62 gigawatt of renewable energy, like hydropower, wind, solar panel, and tidal, you name it, for the next 30 years. Existing electricity in Indonesia today is 73 gigawatt. But what we need, basically, we have to be careful also to look at the base load. If we make some changing here and there, we don't pay attention to the base load. It's very dangerous to our economy. Whatever our policy is, we don't want to see our economy disturbed by this program. Our economy today is, last year grew like 5.1%, and we believe that we can, grow like 5.2% this coming year, and by 3 years' time, we can grow like 6% or maybe 6.5% for the next 4 or 5 years. So this one, we have to look at this carefully, the equilibrium of this. We are ready to export also green energy to our neighbor, Singapore. It's 3.4 gigawatt. And by doing so, then we build our own solar panel industry, because we have our own silica a lot, the material for the solar panel. So this one is very important. But then we have to have our own grid. That's another issue. So there are so complex issues here. It's not only the to build the renewable energy, but also the infrastructure of this. And besides that, we should also discuss carefully with our neighbors, because if we export the green energy for their own database, we need also the green energy for our own database. So how do we do this one? This is also very important. If you look at also data today, last year we have like 5 gigawatt excess capacity of electricity. But next year we should build 2 gigawatt electricity in Indonesia, because our economy moving so well today, because of efficiency, transparency, and less corruption in Indonesia. So, but then we need the support from the international, the interest rate of the loan for this, because like next year we started to early retirement of the 660 megawatt of power plant in Cirebon and 2.5 gigawatt in Suralaya. This program, we have to be careful again. We don't want to lose our own base load. Otherwise, we got collapse our own system. So the collaboration, the private sector, philanthropies, and others is very, very important. I don't think that the government of Indonesia can do it alone.
Shemara, I see you nodding there. I mean, the multitude of it's a complex issue, right, that a lot of these countries are addressing, and that's sort of where multilateral development banks jump in, which you and Bill work quite closely with to accelerate private investment. I mean, are there still barriers to supporting countries like Indonesia and others?
Well, I mean, I'll go first, Bill, and then you can comment. But I think ultimately stepping up to sort of 50,000 feet, to solve this climate issue, what we need is solutions. And as the Minister was saying and Ajay was saying, we need solutions that can be the default choice of rational actors, so you can thread the needle with driving, uplifting living standards and economic development with climate-related solutions across, in energy, we've cracked the code now on wind and solar, and they're pretty much the cheapest form of new build energy, but they're intermittent. So we need firming solutions, and things like coal are firmed low-cost sources of energy. So we need to figure out, is it going to be hydrogen? Is it going to be nuclear? Is it going to be long-duration storage with batteries? And the same in transport, where we've cracked the code on passenger vehicles. We need to do long haul in shipping, in aviation, etc. I could go on in agriculture, but in doing that, there's very high risk as you go into the new things. And when I first started going to the COPs in 21 in Glasgow, the private sector, we've been investing for 2 decades in these things. We found we actually, with these solutions, deliver good financial return for our investors, as well as good solutions for the communities. But we were doing that as a private sector, and we started coming together at COP26. What's happened since is we've now discovered if we work with the MDBs, they are actually quite positioned to do that early stage, high risk, high return, targeting investing. And the work we've been doing with Ajay and the Private Sector Investment Lab, which Bill is involved in with me, has been a game changer, I think, in really helping the MDB money work with mobilising and catalysing private sector money. And I'll let Bill comment, but I've just landed from the red eye from Mexico overnight and was chatting with the IFC a lot there. There's a couple of projects we've been doing with them there. It's palpable, the change. They're not just helping us uplift a developing market like Mexico, they're giving us sustainability-based loans for logistics there, but we're looking at developing e-methanol, which is actually going to be useful for the whole world in shipping, transport, and meeting IMO standards happening in Mexico, where they are bringing, it's a 2.6 billion project, they're bringing 250 million of debt and equity, which is really helping get that project off the ground. And we're helping find off-takers, we're helping find other finance, but the MDBs are really coming with us on these early projects we're finding. And just briefly, I mean, the 4 things we're doing in the lab are we're trying to get guarantees deployed much more effectively. We're trying to work with junior debt and first loss equity. We're trying to also deal with the FX issue, and we're trying to deal with syndication. And we've all been allocated work in this lab. So I'm on project number 2, I think, of those in the junior equity, but that's a brief summary of the importance of partnering up with the MDBs for us in the private sector at some of the things we're doing and how we're breaking down the lab.
Bill, how do you navigate some of those complications that Shemara was just outlining there?
I think we're figuring it out, is the short answer. But as Mr. Luhut said, and as your question suggested, that the Indonesia JET-P is a real prototype. And it's challenging. So there's many pieces to that, but certainly at the core, it's a public-private partnership. And it really is three ways: public outside Indonesia, public inside Indonesia, and then the private sector. And one of the thorniest issues is the early decommissioning of coal-fired power plants. So we know that in a country that's growing very fast with enormous power demand, and 70% of existing power coming from fossil fuel burning, that unless we address the challenge of increases and actually begin to reduce that, it's going to be difficult to tackle the agenda. But to ask a country to decommission a 40-year plant after 20 years, at a time when the economy is growing as strongly as Indonesia is an unrealistic expectation. And it's not just Indonesia, it's anywhere in the world. So finding a way to get the capital that's available into the right place in a way that can actually be used to pay today for all this renewable power that's going to be in place 20 years from now, right, to replace the coal-fired power plants is enormously complicated. But it's happening. It's happening in many different ways. It's happening with developments in the carbon markets that are beginning to think about standards and legislative frameworks that can be set to support that kind of activity. It's happening with key initiatives, for example, from the Singaporeans who have said, yeah, we'll help structure those credits and we'll buy the first tranche. Relatively small amount of money, but very high symbolic value and a crowding in effect. So how do we navigate? It's a lot of trial and error, but it can't work without public and private sector working very, very closely together.
And Majid, I want you to jump in here because there are also other models similar to what you and your team are doing with ALTÉRRA, a $30 billion fund that is trying to do just that, right? Channel funding to where it needs to be. I mean, how is that progressing for you and your team?
Well, I mean, first of all, we're a baby organization. We're 8 months old, so we feel very proud that we've already made a huge difference in the sense that we've got a $30 billion fund. We've committed $6.5 billion with 3 partners, Brookfield, TPG, and BlackRock, and we are mobilizing across 7 different strategies. We already have about 40 gigawatts of power out there that we're invested in. But what I think is more important in that is that we've got the best and the brightest minds in the finance world thinking about how to invest in the Global South. We've created 2 new funds with TPG and Brookfield, and we have more to come with BlackRock, focused on the Global South. Our catalytic fund has $5 billion committed to the Global South, and they're committing their best talent to thinking about how we address the challenges of investing in the developing world. Last year, as DG of COP, you know, COP28 was one of the most successful COPs we've had. We were able to mobilize more than $80 billion at COP. And we traveled around the world trying to figure out, well, what are the challenges that are preventing the investment, particularly to the Global South, in climate? And what we saw time and time again was that we understood what the barriers were, we understood what the challenges were, but we weren't just taking that, nobody was taking that step to move forward. And we thought about what kind of solutions we could create. We knew that we had concessional capital already there. We know we have the private sector. And how could we bridge between those 2 things? And that's how we came up with ALTÉRRA, with this idea that we could be a leader, we could bring the private sector along with us, work with others to try to mobilize capital. And today, I think we really are doing that.
What is the next goal? I mean, we have COP29 coming up very soon. Many people are referring to it as the finance COP. What is that next goal then for you?
COP29 is going to be really critical. COP28 was about action, right? And I think that what we did really successfully that was different was for the first time, instead of talking about how we were going to engage the private sector, we brought the private sector to the table and said, hey, what are you going to do? And that was a key shift. I think that, you know, as a negotiator who'd been in climate for many, many years, I was in Paris, you know, I felt that we were talking a lot about mobilizing the private sector, but we weren't talking to them. We would go to energy conversations and there wouldn't be the leaders of energy in those meetings. We would go to finance conversations and we wouldn't have ministers of finance having the conversation about how to mobilize finance. That changed at COP28. And now as we go to COP29, we really need to deliver on that finance piece. And that's why our Azerbaijani colleagues I know are going to do a fantastic job, but we collectively have to help them to deliver an outcome. That means that we need to see the developed world stepping up and showing leadership, and we need to see how we mobilize the private sector, how we all come together to mobilize capital behind the solutions that we know are out there. We don't need to invent new things. The solutions are there, we just need to invest in them.
Minister, from your perspective, what is the ask then for you when you go to COP29? I mean, do you continue to ask for more accelerated capital to be channeled into your market?
Just transition energy, one thing.
Yeah.
But we are also not talking on the just transition energy, because this already, we have a schedule, we have planned everything. We just need finance with the reasonable interest. That's, I think, very important. Number two, we have a program right now, what we call it seaweed program. We have like 2.5 million hectares of area that we can grow seaweed. Seaweed also could help us to catch this carbon sink, you know. So this is very important to reduce the carbon emission, because Indonesia per capita carbon emission today only 1.8 ton per capita, while a developed country like US maybe 14.5 ton per capita. So we are much lower than the baseline. Baseline is 4.5 ton per capita. So this is, I think, very important to understand. So we are very open for this. We like to do something not only just transition energy, but also, like I said, seaweed. And we also has a program ongoing now, is replanting, mangrove replanting program, 600,000 hectares. Now, this is financed by the government of Indonesia, already up to 200,000 hectares of the mangrove replanting in Indonesia. So something like this also is very important. So seaweed, just transition energy, mangrove replanting program, deforestation, the moratorium, something like this. Have to do it the combination. Cannot be one side. It cannot be one country. Have to be collaboration among nations in order to save this planet. If you can do this together, I'm pretty confident we can do it. Developing countries, they just follow the developed country. But developed countries should understand also, if you give the interest rate as a commercial one, what's the point? What's the point? We can get cheaper than this interest. Our government can do this. But if you're talking about the collaboration, the contribution of developed countries have to be very real. But developing country like Indonesia, we commit and we can deliver what we promise to you.
We have to leave it there, but thank you all so much, and thank you all for listening.
Please welcome President and Chief Investment Officer of Alphabet and Google, Ruth Porat, in conversation with Bloomberg New Economy Editorial Director Eric Schatzker.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Ruth, welcome back to the Global Business Forum.
It's great to be with you.
Ruth knows a few things about artificial intelligence. Google, as I confirmed backstage, spends an awful lot of money on artificial intelligence. When I asked Ruth how much, she used a word that we can't repeat on stage. Ruth, much of the breathless excitement that greeted generative AI a couple of years ago has given way to a very different range of sentiments, of emotions even. There's tension, there's doubt, there's even anxiety. What is the right way to frame both the potential and the risks of AI?
So we do live in an extraordinary time in history, a generational time. I think the upsides are extraordinary. We'll start with that. There are really four to think about. The economic upside, estimates have it at $17 to $25 trillion of economic upside by 2030 per year. There's the social issues that can be addressed with AI around healthcare, around education, around climate change. There's the opportunity to massively push the frontier in science, for example, Google DeepMind, open source, something called AlphaFold. 2 million scientists are working on this, and the view is that will help them accelerate drug discovery. And then there's security issues. Now, to your question, to maximize the upside, we collectively need to ensure that we have the base, the foundation, so that it is safe in execution around everything that ranges from information to job transition to how we use energy efficiently for the planet. And so when I think about the way we approach this, everywhere we go, in my mind, I've got a simple heuristic, a triangle. What's fascinating to me is in speaking to heads of state around the globe, they want to make sure they're capturing this upside. As one said, this is an opportunity, a legacy opportunity for economic growth in delivering these benefits to everyone in his country. And that starts with infrastructure, the investments that you were asking about, deep technical infrastructure, the subsea cables that link everybody up. But it then very much goes to, you have to be connected to access the information and tools that ensure that everyone, everywhere around the planet, has the same quality of information and access to markets that everyone in this room has. And one of the things to your question about AI is we are now serving people around the globe in 246 languages. But what's really profound and goes to this notion that AI is moving really quickly, we added 110 languages in the last 6 months alone, which means 500 million people on the planet can now access information in their own language. That's the second part of the triangle. The third part of the triangle is ensuring that people have the skills to thrive in this changing world and ensuring that we're doing the right kind of training, skilling globally. Delivering on that triangle maximizes the upside and helps with some of those issues that you asked about on the downside.
President Biden will be here on this stage in a few short minutes. Please don't think of us as the warm-up act. His administration has developed a wide range of initiatives around AI. What do you hope to see in terms of AI policies from the next president, whomever that happens to be, and the next Congress?
Well, I think very importantly, let's take stock of what has been done, because I think at the core of the approach from the White House, from the president and his team, has been a recognition about the strategic imperative due to the economic upside and the social benefit upside. And so it's about maximizing the upside, mitigating the downside, and bringing together experts from the private sector and the public sector to work together has been key, point number one. Point number two, they've taken a risk-based approach, which is a recognition that AI is applied to many different things in our daily life. The opportunity is wide, and so there's not one size fits all. Think about the risk inherent in the application of AI in any area. And then they've required the industry to do a number of things to actually mitigate against the downside around transparency, around red teaming, things to prevent abuse of it. The other thing is really encouraging bipartisan solutions. So I would also say, if I could broaden it out, right now in the Senate, there's a bipartisan approach around an AI framework that Senator Schwimmer and Round and others have proposed. And again, it looks at all elements of how do we invest to be competitive, how do we prevent working on the downside. So I would hope it's a continuation of this and that it continues to be bipartisan because it's such a critical issue.
I'm going to make an assertion. If the West is going to win the contest in artificial intelligence against a centrally planned economy, that would be China, of course, the public and private sectors, to your point, have to work together collaboratively as partners. How would you rate the effectiveness of that partnership today?
Early days, and I think very strong. And let me explain why. I think you're absolutely right that this is a strategic imperative. The good news is the U.S. today, the West today, is in a leadership position, but that is not a foregone conclusion. We have very formidable competitors globally. And so I would say there are a number of different levels on which it's operating. The government, the U.S. government, the White House has really pushed forward things like the Partnership for Global Infrastructure to make sure not only that we're investing in the U.S., but that we're working with countries around the globe in a way where we can bring infrastructure solutions. We just announced, as an example, Google did a cable from Kenya down to South Africa over to Australia that helps build the resilience that's needed. And to my prior point about the triangle, you've got the infrastructure that unlocks the content that's needed to access world markets. So areas like Partnership for Global Infrastructure, really important, public-private partnership, really important. But there's another critical element that's true for everyone in the room, and we're seeing it again, at the federal and state level in the states. It's important to lead from the front. I talked about this $17 to $25 trillion economic upside opportunity. That only happens if we see what economists call diffusion. It is being used in every industry, and we're already seeing a lot of effort around that.
There is an important question around the sustainability of AI, and it has to do with energy. I know you know the numbers. A ChatGPT query uses 10 times as much electricity as a Google search. I'm assuming, of course, that a Gemini query uses less. Globally, AI demand, energy demand, excuse me, is going to increase by some 2.5-fold in the next 5 years, and with it, of course, a similar jump in carbon emissions from data centers. Can we really have an AI-powered future while getting to net zero by 2050?
It is absolutely imperative that we continue to focus on it. At Google years ago, we made a commitment about running our data centers 24/7 on carbon-free energy, and there are a number of components to that. We're continuing to invest in renewable solutions around the globe, but I also want to say that one of the very important parts, we, like others, are investing substantially to improve the efficiency of compute, and you're seeing it in two places. You're seeing it in the chip side, hardware, and you're seeing it in models. Model efficiency has increased with some of the testing we're doing anywhere from 100 to 1,000 times. It's the right thing for the planet, and if you just put it in economic terms, for us to get a return on invested capital, two things need to happen. We need to, one, make sure that we're seeing this diffusion throughout the economy, that there's actually growth that is delivered from the investment in AI, that it's not something that's kind of sand between your fingers. And so it does improve effectiveness and impact of the public sector and the private sector. We need to make sure that we're as efficient as possible with compute. And with the energy that is required. And so we have done a number of things. Let me give you one example. Years ago, Google made a commitment to match 100% of energy consumption with renewables. We thought that it would take us a decade to get there. That forward market commitment actually catalyzed investment and creation of capacity. We hit that target in 5 years. This administration, Secretary Kerry, others, and the industry have focused on what are some forward market commitments in order to catalyze additional investment in renewable energies, and it obviously is an imperative, as the other panels have talked about.
Ruth, thank you so very much.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Please stay in your seats for a closing address from President Joe Biden. Please welcome actor and activist Jane Fonda.
Hi. Hi, everybody. I'm so glad to be here and to have the honor of introducing our next speaker. Michael Bloomberg is someone who needs no introduction, especially not in New York. But he's also someone who named his company, his foundation, his memoir after himself. So I don't think that he'll mind if I sing his praises for just a few minutes, but seriously. Michael is someone who brings people together, and well, look, you're proof of that, right? Hi, everybody. He doesn't just reach across the table. He builds consensus, and he doesn't get bogged down by the scale or scope of problems. He focuses on finding and implementing solutions. He's done that as a business leader, as mayor, and as a philanthropist. He's one of the country's leading voices on some of the most pressing challenges we face, like gun violence, public health, immigration, and of course, the climate crisis. And his foundation, the Bloomberg Foundation, Bloomberg Philanthropies, has given away more than $17 billion to all causes and initiatives focused on saving and improving lives. He also serves as the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy on Climate Ambition and Solutions, and as the WHO Ambassador for Non-Communicable Diseases and Injuries, whatever the hell they are. And this year, President Biden awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor. It makes sense, because the president and Mike share a lot of the same qualities. Like Mike, President Biden is a dedicated public servant who puts people and country first, and he understands that we don't have a moment to wait when it comes to the climate crisis. The Biden administration's inflammation, well, that's interesting, but it does that too. Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, will be the foundation for all the climate progress still to come, and it's up to all of us to build on it. I've been fortunate to call Michael a friend for a while, and I've gotten to work with him too. And I can tell you, I'm sure he's honored by the accolades, but what matters to him the most is making a difference, especially when it comes to the environment. He's taken on the coal industry and the fossil, forget natural gas, the fucking fossil gas. There's nothing natural about it, and it's terrible for people and for the environment. And he's won, Michael Bloomberg has, again and again and again. And now he's taking on, yay, the petrochemical industry. Smart money is on Mike, and that one too. He also helped revolutionize how we think about climate finance. He's been a much-needed voice of realism and pragmatism for the climate movement. He keeps us focused on solutions that can make a difference today, right here, right now. And here's a novel concept. He then helps us implement those solutions so they can actually make a difference. Mike's superpower is bringing people together from different sectors and different fields to solve some of the world's biggest problems. And I've known a few billionaires. Biblically, if you really want to know. Michael is different. Michael is different. And I don't understand why this white guy, billionaire in New York, understands the importance, the strategic importance of listening to the voices of black women in Louisiana. I don't know why. God bless him. And here's what the Global Business Forum is all about. And as is often the case at convenings like this, his vision and leadership is the reason that we're all here. With that, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Michael Bloomberg.
Jane, I didn't grow up in a world where I knew famous people, stars like you, but I promise you this, the next memoir that I write is going to be about you, and I will get even. Anyways, thanks for that nice introduction and for all of your work on behalf of the environment, public health, and so many other important causes. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. And we're honored to have him with us as President Joe Biden. Nice round of applause for Joe. I've had many chances to work with Joe on issues that we both care deeply about, including preventing gun violence. Thanks to his leadership in the White House, Congress passed the first major gun safety bill in a generation. And it's one of those many issues where he's been able to work across the aisle and bring people together. And another one of those issues, his major focus has been on climate change. I think it's fair to say no president has done more to push our country forward on climate change, starting on Joe's first day in office when he brought the U.S. back into the Paris Agreement. And he has wisely put, yes, he deserves a round of applause for that. He has wisely put fighting climate change at the center of his work, strengthening the economy, showing how the two go hand in hand. Once again, Joe reached across the aisle and helped push through Congress major bills on climate and infrastructure. They have led to a surge of new investment in clean energy and created unprecedented opportunities for cities to raise their climate ambitions, because Joe does understand that mayors are powerful allies in the climate fight. Joe has set high goals for cutting emissions, and he supported the kind of bottom-up action we need to achieve these goals, including strong partnerships with business. And Bloomberg Philanthropies has been glad to collaborate closely with him and his team. We are committed to doing everything we can to build on the climate progress that he has started. And so I want to thank him for all of his leadership. Now, before I welcome Joe to the stage, we're going to hear from a few others who want to thank President Biden. Play the video.
Democrats say it's the largest ever single climate investment in history.
The most concerted, ambitious pledge on carbon emissions we have ever had in this country, bar none.
This new law could slash U.S. carbon dioxide emissions by 40% by 2030.
The Inflation Reduction Act includes more than $400 billion of new spending.
President Biden.
President Biden, thank you.
Thank you, President Joe Biden.
President Biden has been the most effective and impactful climate champion our nation's ever seen.
Proven to the world that change is possible.
Thank you for everything you're doing to accelerate the transition from fossil fuels to clean energy.
For delivering the largest climate and clean energy investments of any government anywhere in the world.
For making historic investments to accelerate our green economy, put Americans back to work.
Limiting new offshore oil and gas drilling in key coastal areas
demonstrates the leadership across the globe.
He also delivered by setting aside hundreds of billions of dollars for environmental justice communities.
Thanks to President Biden, Congress and EPA have done more for the climate in the last 4 years than ever before.
Thank you, President Biden, for keeping your promise.
Thank you for your leadership. Let's keep making progress.
No other administration in history has been this committed to the climate crisis.
Because of you, we're on the right path for generations to come.
Thank you for ensuring that our communities have a say in our future.
For our children and grandchildren, how we need it. What a difference you're making. Thank you.
and on behalf of the entire climate movement, thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome President Joe Biden.
Thank you. If I were smart, I'd leave now. Thank you all so very much. Mr. Mayor, Michael, thank you. You know, I awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom because you've literally revolutionized our economy. It's not hyperbole. You transformed how we consume information. You challenged and solved the toughest issues. And thank you for hosting this important forum. And thank all the business leaders here today. And thank my cabinet members for their work as well. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm is here. The EPA Administrator Michael Reagan is here. You know, 4 years ago, Kamala and I inherited the worst pandemic in a century, the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. I got to hold a minute here and tell you a little story. When I sat in the Oval Office every morning at 9 o'clock and then ended the day with Barack for 8 years, and there was only one portrait above the fireplace, a portrait of George Washington, fairly small but a beautiful portrait. And so I didn't realize at the time, all the times I've been in the Oval, that the incoming president cannot go into the Oval on the 20th until after 4 o'clock, and the outgoing president has to leave by 10, although the outgoing president never showed up. Anyway, so I asked my brother Jim, who has a better taste than I do, to pick what we needed to pick what desk you want, what rug, the things you want in your office. And I said I only wanted a couple things. I wanted to make sure I had the Resolute desk, and I wanted, looking next to the fireplace, I wanted the bust of Martin Luther King, who was one of my heroes as I was coming up as a young civil rights guy, and Bobby Kennedy. I have great admiration for John Kennedy, but I could never picture him at my kitchen table. Anyway, so we're standing, I walk in, and my brother's showing me, and I look up, and there's this giant portrait of Franklin Roosevelt. And John Meacham was on the speaker. And I said, why Franklin Roosevelt? I admire him, but why Franklin Roosevelt? He said, well, no one's inherited an economy in more disarray than when Franklin Roosevelt was president. I said, isn't that wonderful? Swear to God, true story. Look to the left, there's Abraham Lincoln. I said, why Abraham Lincoln? I admired the hell out of Lincoln, but why? He said, the country has never been as divided since the Civil War. I said, I'm the hell out of here. Anyway. But look, a lot's changed. A lot's changed. When he came to office, the climate is in crisis, and one existential threat that faces all nations. Mayor Bloomberg, Michael, you've convened leadership, national and international levels, to lead the charge and change the mindset. You know, I just met with the president of the UAE, who is a massive investor in clean energy around the world. That's what he wanted to talk to me about. I just hosted a 3-day conference at the Quad in Delaware. The Prime Minister of India, Australia, and Japan, 3 of the fastest growing economies in the world. They understand you can't remain dependent on fossil fuels. They need to lead the clean energy future. I had a discussion with the President of Kenya, whom I hosted for a state visit. Kenya is also a global leader in clean energy. Together we've launched the U.S.-Kenya Climate and Clean Energy and Industrial Partnership. All this matters. Now I want to pivot to home here. Since I've been president, I've flown over more wildfires, unfortunately, it's the God's truth, in helicopters from Arizona, Idaho, all the way to Montana. And more acreage, I've looked down and I've seen more acreage burned on the ground, to the ground, than the entire state of Maryland in terms of the area. Just wildfires. I've toured the community, ravaged by tornadoes and floods. More that costs lives and livelihoods. It costs taxpayers billions of dollars in damage. But when Kamala and I came to office, there was no real plan in place to do anything about it. As the government, we were doing nothing, virtually nothing. We were determined not only to deliver immediate economic relief to the American people, but to transform how our economy works in the long term, to write a new economic playbook, to grow the economy from the middle out and the bottom up instead of the top down. That way, workers do well, no one's left behind, and the wealthy still do very well. And foster fair competition. Invest in all of America and all Americans. And I've been pointing out when it comes to the climate, every time I talk about it, whether I was trying to convince labor or business to come along, I'd say, when I think climate, I think jobs. I think jobs, and I mean it. Good union-paying jobs. In fact, I'm proud to have kept my commitment to bring unions and business to the climate table. That's what we're seeing. Rather than climate conservation about sacrifice, conversation about sacrifice, or focus on doing less, Kamala and I have pursued an ambitious climate policy focused on growth. And the public and private sector lead all of it. All of you in this audience, you've led, building our economic capacity. Together we've proven the strong middle class, thriving innovation and manufacturing are the key to winning climate here at home and abroad. Here are the key climate pages from the new economic playbook. We rejoined the Paris Agreement immediately after my predecessor had walked away. We got to work planning private capital pulling private capital off the sidelines, getting the workers in the game, and once again leading the world on climate. Bringing jobs back home, manufacturing and technology. We invented here in the United States decades ago, bringing it back. We're bringing back hope and pride in communities, opening shuttered factories in zip codes too often left behind. I might point out I was criticized very much for having done more to invest in red states than blue states. But I made a commitment that when I ran, I'd be president for all people, whether they voted for me or not. And we're doing that in what I call Investing in America agenda. I wrote and signed the law of the Inflation Reduction Act, the most significant climate law ever passed in the history of the world. We were told it couldn't get done, but we did it. More than $369 billion in climate and clean energy. Not a single Republican voted for it, but the Inflation Reduction Act lowers energy costs for families with rebates and tax credits to install rooftop solar and energy-efficient appliances, weatherizing their windows and doors and high-tech insulation, and more efficient heating and cooling systems, and so much more. And you get a tax credit for doing it. The groundbreaking laws also catalyze clean energy innovation in areas like battery technology, nuclear energy, geothermal, that will create hundreds of thousands of jobs for American workers. In fact, along with other historic investments in infrastructure, and our infrastructure bill was $1.3 trillion in science and technology, private companies in the United States and globally have announced investments of nearly $1 trillion in clean energy manufacturing here in America in the last 3 years. And you all are the leaders of that. You're the ones. We're just getting started. In the face of the dangerous and deadly impacts of climate change, we're also making our cities and towns more resilient. This is a new formula on climate, creating jobs, reducing pollution, cleaning up our water and air, improving our quality of life, building a better America. For example, a once-in-a-generation modernization of our grid means this year we'll add more new electric capacity than we have in 2 decades, and 96% of that will be clean energy. I went to the University of Delaware, and the university professor was the first solar-powered building that inspired residential solar adaptation. And more than 80% of the solar panels and components are manufactured in China, though. But now we're turning that around. American solar panel manufacturing is up 4 times what it was 4 years ago, with more to come. America invented the lithium-ion battery technology that's powering our clean energy transformation, including electric vehicles and the grid. But when Kamala and I came to office, America was barely making any of these batteries, while other countries are commercializing them, but not anymore. There are more than 14 gigafactories, massive, large-scale factories opening or under construction to make advanced batteries here in America, and more to come. We're also making the battery components here in America, making sure the supply chain starts in America. And all of this is helping power an electric revolution in transportation. We've quadrupled the development of electric vehicles since it took office. We're deploying a fleet of clean school buses that will not pollute the air. Our postal service is going fully electric. We've invested $45 billion in electric trains in America, because if a person can choose between a car and a train to get to the destination at the same time, 70–80% of that, they will take the train. And it's 70–80% less pollution than driving the same distance. And we now have tools to lower emissions from building materials. For the first time ever, we're beginning to produce clean steel, cement, and aluminum. I think most Americans have no idea how much pollution has occurred when you make cement. Well, the American people know how much pollution heavy industries produce. Since each one produces as much pollution as a small country, we're now making most significant investment ever in rural America. 80,000 farms across America are implementing climate-smart agriculture, cover crops, nutrient management, storing carbon in the soil, which creates new sources of wealth for farmers, families, and at the same time. We're also carrying out the most ambitious conservation agenda in a long time. We're on track to conserve, a commitment I made, 30% of all our lands and waters by the year 2030. Since taking office, my administration has already conserved over 42 million acres. The Inflation Reduction Act is also the most significant law ever advanced in environmental justice for disadvantaged and so-called fence-line communities, like Cancer Alley in Louisiana or Route 9 corridor in Delaware. We're making sure these communities receive 40% of the benefits of the key investments in pollution reduction, clean energy and infrastructure. All this matters. It matters a great deal. In just under 4 years, the economy has created nearly 16 million jobs, the most ever in a single presidential term. In just 2 years since the Inflation Reduction Act, we've created more than 330,000 clean energy jobs. I should say you created that. Clean energy jobs are growing twice as fast as the economy overall. Clean energy workers are joining unions at the highest level in history. And I'm really proud to have launched the American Climate Corps, patterned after the Peace Corps and American Corps, to put tens of thousands of young people on the path to good-paying, clean energy jobs to improve our environment and grow our economy. And you know, the United States has reasserted America's position as a global leader in climate. We're leading an all-out effort to partner with nations to reduce global emissions, to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. You all remember when Putin invaded Ukraine, which sent food and energy prices soaring around the world, and showing just how volatile and fragile a fossil fuel-based economy can be. The United States rallied the world against Putin's aggression. We've led the world in releasing oil reserves and stabilizing global energy markets, while also working quickly as possible to deploy clean energy resources. You know, I convened summit leaders on climate and the American Leaders Summit, the African Leaders Summit, I should say. In COP28, the United States galvanized the world to commit, for the first time, to transition away from unabated fossil fuels. Across the board, America's climate leadership has encouraged American companies to invest in private capital for clean energy development and to low to middle income nations, and so much more. I thank the business leaders who are here today for leading the way, and I mean that. All this historic climate change is in stark contrast to my predecessor. He says he'd repeal the Inflation Reduction Act. He'd let our factories shut down. He'd move the world backwards. His denial of climate change condemns our future generations to a more dangerous world. And by the way, Windmills do not cause cancer. I think we've laid out a better choice, and today we're better positioned than any other nation of the world to promote a clean energy future. In fact, it's a perfect time to go big. The market for clean energy is booming. Inflation is way down in America. The Federal Reserve just announced lowering interest rate, and I predict they'll go further down. We should give business even more confidence to invest trillions of dollars that are on the sidelines in the clean energy industries of the future. I'm doing my part. Now I'm calling on other companies with the capital in the room to invest more and do more. Now's the time. Let me close with this. 4 years, we've gone from historic crisis to historic progress. And in doing it with a new playbook based on one of the oldest truths of our nation. Invest in America. Believe in America. Believe in possibilities and share it with the world. That's what I see, if I could see all of you, when I look at all of you. I really mean this. I know I only look like I'm 40 years old, but I'm a little older. You know, I've been doing this a long time, 51 years in elective office. And it's hard to say. It's hard to say. But I give my word to Biden. I'm never more optimistic about America's future. And Michael, let me go back to you. Your initiatives, your commitment, your vision, your dedication have literally changed the world and gone a long way to encourage Americans to be convinced once again that we can do anything. We just remember who the hell we are. We're the United States of America. There is nothing beyond our capacity when we act together. Folks, as a student of history, we're the only nation in the world that's come out of every major crisis we've entered stronger than we went in. Every single time. Every single time. And with this assembly in this room, you're the leaders not only in America, you're the world. The rest of the world looks to us. And it's not about my being president. I give you my word. Think about it. If we didn't lead, who the hell leads? Who fills the vacuum without America leading? That's who we are. That's our obligation. And that's our incredible opportunity. So folks, I really am optimistic. I really mean it. You listened, and I didn't even go into all the things that are going on in the rest of the world in terms of how they want to transition away from fossil fuels, want to use peaceful nuclear technology, a whole range of things. Hydrogen, so many things are on the table. And we can do this. We really can. And we owe it to our children. And quite frankly, we owe it to lead the world. If my mom was here, she'd say, Joey, end it, okay? And I will. So God bless you all. May God protect our troops. Thank you very, very much. Every time I'd walk out of my grandfather's Finnegan's house up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, he'd yell, Joey, keep the faith. My grandmother would, no, Joey, spread it. Let's spread the faith. Thank you.